He said it was for our future but locked me out of it. I am Margaret, 52, and Thomas is my husband. For 3 decades we split chores while he handled the money. Our kitchen smelled like cinnamon and varnish from the old cabinets he promised to refinish. On Tuesday morning, at the same table where we paid bills, he smiled and rolled a key across his knuckles like a trick coin. "This is safer if I keep it," he said, meaning the safe, meaning everything with our names on it. I tried to make it sound small. "I just need the tax folder. It's already sorted. It's my signature. It's our future." The words clanged in my head. A small future, if only one person could open it. There was a list on the fridge, groceries, insurance reminder, a note to call the dentist, and I heard my own voice go careful. "Then let's open it together." The request was plain, the tone even, the stakes obvious. If I couldn't see the records, I couldn't protect the house or the life we had built. He slid the key into his pocket and kissed my forehead like I was a child. By afternoon, the power company texted about an overdue balance. I stared at the message and felt an old habit rise: make excuses, assume the best. But the excuse didn't fit the friction in his voice, or the quiet switch from "we" to "I'll take care of it." I walked to the branch 2 blocks from our street. The clerk knew me by name, the kind of gatekeeper who remembers birthdays and the color of your tote bag. "Could I get the monthly statement?" I asked, my hands calm on the counter. She printed it and slid it across without comment. "Let me know if anything looks off." Something did. A cash withdrawal I hadn't made. Another transfer that didn't match any bill. Then the line that made the room feel thinner. A missing $2,500, taken in 2 neat pulls, like someone cutting fabric with sharp scissors. I didn't argue with the paper. Paper doesn't explain. Paper just waits. I folded the statement, thanked the clerk, and felt the first clean thought I'd had in months. I am not imagining this. Back home, he was fixing the crooked picture over the mantel, a chore he used to put off. The key was still in his pocket. I set the envelope on the table and pulled out 2 chairs. "Sit with me." He didn't. He kept fiddling with the nail until the frame hung level, then turned. "You went to the bank without me." "I saw withdrawals I didn't make. I moved things around, that's all." "For what?" "Our future." He had learned that phrase like a spell. I wouldn't let him cast it again. "Show me the safe," I said. "Later." "Now." He laughed, but it was flat, humorless. I stood between him and the hallway. "Where is the key?" "Safe." "Where is the safe?" "Safe." The room felt like it had fewer exits than before. A marriage can shrink that way, doors closing one by one until you stand in the last doorway, deciding who you are. I thought of the house deed, the mortgage schedule, the wills, the box of receipts I had labeled by month because I trusted his system and didn't want to be the nagging wife. The stakes were simple and hard. Our home could be stripped while I pretended not to notice. I kept my voice calm. "If we're a team, you open it with me." He stepped close enough that I could see the soft fray in his shirt collar. "You always overreact." "I'm reacting just enough." He moved to pass. I didn't move. He lifted his hands as if to placate me, palm out, like we were at a crosswalk. "Don't make this ugly." "It's already ugly." Silence stretched. Then he tried the old tone again, the reasonable husband tone, the tone that had fooled me for years. "Let me handle this. You don't need to worry." 3 short breaths later, the part of me that looked for the bright side finally sat down and shut up. I pictured the safe, the gap where the key should be, the hollow where trust used to sit. I picked up the envelope and tapped it once, not loud, just enough to mark the moment. "If there's nothing to hide, unlock it." He smiled like a host closing the door after the party. "I can't do that right now." "Why not?" "Because you'll get confused." "Try me." He stared, and I watched the pleasant mask go still. The mask is how secrets breathe. I let the seconds work on him, because time can be an ally when truth is in the room and there's only one chair left to sit on. "Open it," I said. I said no. I pulled in a slow breath and kept my shoulders down. The plan formed itself. Copy everything, change what I could change, tell someone who would write it down. But first, one clean line across the mess. I would not accept a locked door in my own life. He shifted past me and reached for his jacket. The movement was small, but the meaning was large. I followed him to the entryway. He grabbed his keys from the bowl and kept the one I wanted out of sight. "Give it to me." "No." "Then I'll ask the bank to help." "They won't," he said too quickly. I let the quiet do its work again. He looked at the door, then at me, and finally down, as if the floor might open and swallow us both. The frame over the mantel ticked against the wall. I heard my own voice steady, the way you sound when you've decided to stand up and you actually do. "How do you protect a future you won't let me see?" He didn't answer. He put his hand on the knob and spoke in a tone I had never heard from him, low and fixed, like a promise turned backward. "You won't find it." "Find what?" "The key." "Where is it?" He opened the door. Cold air slid across my arms. He stepped outside and looked down the street as if the answer were parked at the curb. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to me, not really. It was to the thing he cared about most. He said it like a triumph, like a decree, like the game was already over. He hid the key where love couldn't reach. He said numbers don't lie, people do. The words came out smooth, like a proverb he'd rehearsed. He sat at the dining table surrounded by receipts and neat stacks of paper, the kind that made him look responsible. The table clock ticked through the silence while I tried to match his calm. When I asked about the power bill, he didn't even glance up. "Already handled," he said. The lights above us flickered once and steadied, a quiet contradiction. I watched him add lines to a column, pen gliding fast, steady, deliberate. The sound of ink crossing paper filled the room like a warning. "Why did we get an overdue notice?" I asked again. He sighed. "You don't need to check behind me, Maggie. That's not trust." Trust? It used to mean relief. Now it felt like blindfolds. I stepped closer. "I just want to understand where the money's going." He kept writing. "Bills, groceries, things you'd forget." "I don't forget." "Then you'd remember I said I'd handle it." The air tightened around us. I looked at the drawer where we kept the joint account documents. He noticed my glance, reached for his pen again, and struck through my name on the authorization copy we'd signed together. The scratch of it was louder than any argument. He said, "It's easier this way." Easier for who? I thought. Easier to move money where I can't see it. Easier to play savior with my silence. I stared at the paper, that single thin line erasing my place beside him. That night, I took a file of receipts to my desk at work. The overhead hum of the fluorescent lights reminded me of the ticking clock back home and how sound can feel like pressure when you know something's wrong. My coworker, Anna, had an accountant brother. She called him quietly and handed me the phone. His voice was brisk, factual, kind. "I'll take a look," he said. 2 days later, his email arrived. He had scanned our ledgers, columns of deposits and withdrawals. His note was short. "Check these." The figures stared back at me like an accusation. Small withdrawals over 3 months, neat increments that looked harmless until they didn't. A total of $4,000 missing, all moved through the same branch, always just under the daily limit. Each transaction had his signature. I read the total twice before I realized my hands were shaking. The money itself was one thing, but the precision of it, the method, that was intimacy turned into theft. I sat in the office restroom for 10 minutes, listening to the steady buzz of the air vent, trying not to cry where someone might hear. At home, he poured wine and smiled. "Rough day?" I said. "The accountant called me." He froze mid-sip. "What accountant?" "Anna's brother." "That's overstepping. I wanted clarity. You wanted ammunition." The word hit me like an insult. What would I be fighting? Your own paranoia. "You forged my name," I said. He laughed softly. "Oh, come on. We're married. It's the same account." "It's not the same trust." He set down the glass with a click. "You always make drama out of decimals." I stood at the sink, washing the same plate twice, the water scalding. My reflection in the window looked tired, smaller somehow. In the glass I could see him behind me, leaning against the table, his smile stretched thin. I wondered if he saw the same mirror, if he recognized the woman watching him learn how to lie without blinking. Later, when he went upstairs, I opened the desk drawer where the joint documents had been. Half of them were missing. The smell of the paper, faintly metallic from ink and dust, made me nauseous. I folded the remaining bills, put them in a plain envelope, and slid it into my purse. That night, the house went quiet, except for the refrigerator hum. I opened my laptop and set up a new checking account in my name only. The process took 10 minutes. I entered my information carefully, line by line, then hit confirm. My chest buzzed, not fear now, but a low, solid certainty. It was my first act that didn't need his approval. When I closed the laptop, the living room felt darker. Outside, a streetlight flickered, then steadied again. He was upstairs reading, pretending not to worry. I could hear the faint rustle of pages through the ceiling, like paper whispering secrets. The next morning he said, "I'll drop the payment at the bank." I looked at the light switch near the door. "I'll go with you." He smiled without warmth. "You don't trust me." I said nothing, because the truth was too simple to waste on words. He picked up his briefcase, the same one that once held our first mortgage papers, and walked out whistling a tune I couldn't place. I watched through the window until he disappeared down the street. Then the house sighed, an old wooden sound, almost relief. I unplugged the clock on the wall, silencing its steady accusation. An hour later, the power cut out completely. He smiled when the lights went out. His mother said I'd never understand their system. She stood in the doorway of the garage like a guard. The morning was sharp with cold, enough that my breath fogged while I waited. I told her I just needed to grab the box of holiday lights, the ones I'd packed myself years ago. She gave a small, almost polite laugh. "Thomas keeps important business papers in there. You wouldn't know where to look." It was the way she said important, like it excluded me from the category. I tried to step forward, but she held her ground, hand still on the doorknob. The metal was slick with frost. I could see my reflection in it, smudged, distorted. I smiled thinly, the way people do when they realize kindness has limits. "Then I'll just come back later," I said, "when he's here." She shut the door softly, a sound that still managed to feel final. I walked back to the car, my hands stiff from the cold. Across the street, the neighbor's curtains shifted. Her name was Ruth. She'd lived there since her husband passed. I waved out of habit. That night, she called me. "I saw Thomas at your mother-in-law's again," she said. "He's been moving boxes for weeks." "Boxes?" I asked, my throat tightening. "Big ones. File boxes. Every other night after work." I stared at the phone on the counter after she hung up, the way people stare at something that just rearranged what they thought they knew. The kitchen light flickered once before holding steady. My coffee had gone cold. When he came home later, he looked too calm. "Your mom said you stopped by," I began. "She said you've been storing things." He shrugged out of his coat, avoiding my eyes. "Just business records." "What kind?" "You wouldn't understand the system." That word again, system. The same word she'd used. I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. "Our system should be transparent," I said. He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "You're making a problem where there isn't one." "Then show me what's in the boxes." He smiled without warmth. "You don't trust me." "I'd like to," I said. "You're making it hard." He walked past me toward the kitchen, the argument already over in his mind. I followed, watching him pour himself a drink, his back turned as though I'd ceased to exist. I stood in that silence, realizing something ugly. He didn't think I could stop him. Later that week, I went back while he was at work. The air inside the garage felt colder than it should, like the space had decided it didn't belong to me anymore. I brushed dust from one of the boxes near the door. In my handwriting, careful and deliberate, were the words, House Equity. Only, I'd never labeled anything that way. The letters were too neat, too deliberate, the ink fresh. I lifted the corner of the box. Inside were folders marked with our street address, appraisal forms, and a copy of a mortgage document that looked newer than our last refinance. My fingers tingled as the chill settled deeper into my hands. I took a quick photo with my phone, my breath clouding in the air, and stepped back before I could talk myself into opening another box. As I turned to leave, the neighbor's car pulled up across the driveway. She rolled down her window. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "She watches everything from that back room." "I just needed one thing," whispered. Ruth hesitated, glancing toward the house. "He brings them late at night. I hear the truck. He always checks that door twice before he leaves." I thanked her, my voice thin. The garage door creaked as I lowered it, the sound echoing through the still air like a warning. By the time I reached my car, my heartbeat was matching that hollow rhythm. That evening, he noticed something. "Did you move the boxes?" "What boxes?" "You know which ones." "No," I said too quickly. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, searching, calculating. Then he smiled again, that same practiced calm. "Let's not start inventing things." I wanted to shout, but instead I nodded. Silence can be its own weapon, and that night I decided to use it. While he showered, I locked my personal files, birth certificate, insurance forms, the title to my car, in the trunk of my sedan. The keys felt heavy in my pocket, heavier than any jewelry I owned. When I lay in bed, the cold from the garage seemed to follow me home, seeping under the covers. I imagined those boxes sitting neatly under his mother's roof, the floorboards above them creaking with every step she took. That house wasn't just a refuge anymore. It was a vault, and every secret stored there had my name attached to it. The next morning, when he kissed my cheek on his way out, I flinched. "You're chilly," he said. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, wondering how long he'd been planning it. How long she'd known. The question stayed in my head all day, sharp and constant, until it didn't even feel like a question anymore. It felt like proof. He moved our future into her basement. My name appeared where my hand had never been. Thursday morning at the downtown branch, the teller slid a folder toward me and lowered her voice. "We already processed your approval." The paper felt wrong under my fingertips, a dry drag like sand on skin. I stared at the page and saw my name in a looped stroke I'd never make. The letters looked like me the way a mask looks like a face, close enough to fool a stranger, never close enough to fool the person being copied. "I didn't apply for a loan," I said. She glanced around. "Do you want a private room?" "No, I want the truth." I kept my tone steady because the stakes lived in one plain line in my head. If that paper stood, I could lose the house. She tapped the signature block. "This was signed last week." I read the amount and swallowed. A home loan for $12,000, tied to our address, drafted without a word to me. There were 2 signatures on the page, his bold, mine shaky, and the more I stared, the sicker I felt. The teller slid a small note across the counter, written in tidy pen. "Please confirm signature." I slipped it into my bag, along with a copy of the document, careful not to crease the corner. "I need this investigated," I said. "I can flag it," she answered. "And I can write that you dispute the signature. You'll want to talk to the loan officer, but she's out today. I'm sorry." She hesitated. "Do you feel safe at home?" "I need to be careful," I said. On the walk back, I practiced the conversation I'd been avoiding. I thought of the safe I still couldn't open, the garage I wasn't allowed to enter, the way his mother's smile never reached her eyes. I thought of how control hides in ordinary words, simplify, protect, future, and how quickly those words can strip you of a life you built line by line. He was in the kitchen when I got home, sleeves rolled, humming as if the day were light. I set the folder on the table and stood across from him. "What's this?" he asked. "You tell me." He opened it and didn't flinch. Paperwork. For whose loan? Ours, he said smoothly. You benefit too. Where did you get my signature? He poured water, took a slow sip, and set the glass down with a soft click. You signed the refinance last year. We keep your file. I didn't sign this. I pointed at the loops that pretended to be mine. Not this. He shrugged. Then you forgot. I felt the ground tilt. I remember exactly what I signed. You're being dramatic. Show me the originals, I said. They're filed. Where? Don't start. Open the safe. He smiled without heat. No. Then open your mother's garage. You need to let this go. I stepped closer. You forged my name. Stop saying that. It's true. Then prove it. We stood there breathing, a long, thin pause that felt like a hallway with doors shutting one by one. He thought if he exhausted me, I'd stop. That had worked before. Not now. The teller's note in my bag was small, but it was a hinge. It turned the day. Listen, he said, switching to the tone that always promised reason while delivering none. Banks make mistakes. You misremember. I'm fixing things. You're fixing control. He rolled his neck and laughed, a short sound. You benefit too. Not from theft. Don't use that word. Then stop earning it. He reached for the folder, but I kept my palm on it. For a second, his hand rested on mine, and I felt the pressure of the man I married and the stranger who'd learned how to move money like pieces on a board. I slid the folder into my tote and stepped back. Where are you going? He said. To the branch tomorrow, to speak to the officer, to put in writing what you did. You're overreacting. I'm catching up. He leaned in, voice low. You're going to embarrass yourself. I'm going to protect my life. He straightened. You've always liked a scene. I like a record, I said. And there will be one. He followed me down the hall. You're not thinking clearly. I've never been clearer. At the door he changed tactics, softening everything, posture, voice, even the set of his mouth. You know I take care of us. You know I do. You take care of yourself and call it us. That's cruel. It's accurate. He watched me grip my keys. You don't need to do this. I already started. He took a slow breath and looked past me, as if addressing the house itself. When he spoke again, the softness was gone, replaced by something flat and satisfied, like a man reciting a rule he believed would end the argument in his favor. He said the house was legally his now. The counselor asked who controlled the checkbook. I hesitated long enough for her to look up from the clipboard. The clinic office was small, a waiting room hummed behind the half-open door. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper, clean, official, safe. I said, He does, always has. She wrote something in neat, deliberate strokes. Do you have access to household accounts? No, not anymore. How long has it been that way? About a year. Each answer landed like a quiet admission. I'd walked in telling myself I just needed advice about the loan, but it was more than that. I was building a record, whether I meant to or not. She handed me an intake form. Write in your own words what's been happening. Don't overthink it. The lines were narrow, the kind meant for short versions of long stories. I wrote financial restriction beside his name, then kept going. Moved the safe. Removed my name from account. Told me I wasn't responsible enough. The pen leaked a small blot of ink near the bottom of the page. It spread slowly, like a bruise. She read what I'd written and nodded once. You're describing coercive control. It's not uncommon, but it's serious. The word serious made my stomach turn. It's not violence, I said, almost apologetic. She shook her head. Control is violence, just different tools. That sentence stuck. It followed me through every question after that. Do you have family support? Not really. Any personal account in your name? One. Small. She slid a pamphlet across the desk. This outlines financial abuse under domestic law. It covers your rights, how to freeze accounts, how to request bank verification if you suspect fraud. The paper was crisp, smelling faintly of toner and chemical cleaner.
I touched the edge of it just to feel something steady. "There's also a legal aid number at the back," she said. "They can help you file for financial relief or protective orders if it escalates." Escalates. The word felt like a door opening onto another
corridor I hadn't realized existed. She studied me for a moment. "You seem calm. That's good. But don't mistake calm for safety." "I'm not safe," I admitted, the truth cracking out before I could control it. "I just look practiced." That made her eyes soften. "You've been minimizing this for years, haven't you?" I thought I was keeping the peace. "Peace isn't silence," she said. I signed the bottom of the form. She stamped it and tucked it into a thin manila folder marked with today's date. My proof had a smell, a weight, a shape. It wasn't just words anymore. Before I left, she said, "We'll call if we find irregularities with the loan documentation. Legal aid may contact you within 2 days." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. When I walked outside, the light hit hard after the clinic's dull interior. My car was parked under a tree, and for a long minute I didn't start it. I stared at the form in my lap. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. I remembered his voice. "You don't need to know about the accounts." I could almost hear the clink of his pen on the glass table the day he said it, the same pen he used to forge my name. A breeze carried the sharp, clean smell from the clinic through the open car window. I breathed it in like medicine. Inside the pamphlet, there was a line highlighted in yellow. "Control can be reported." Simple, bureaucratic, almost cold, but it hit me harder than anything she'd said out loud. I thought about the safe, the forged papers, the money that disappeared without explanation. I thought about how small my life had become, how carefully I'd been trained to ask permission. Then I thought about what reporting really meant. Not punishment, not revenge, just record. Proof that I existed inside the damage and that I decided to leave a trail out. I folded the form, slid it into my purse, and whispered to no one, "It ends here." They told me control can be reported. Every dollar told a story I hadn't heard. The fraud officer sat across from me in the small cubicle at the bank. The printer hummed beside him, spitting out line after line of transactions that didn't belong to me. The air inside that office was too quiet, broken only by the faint rhythm of the machine and the occasional click of his pen. He slid the pages toward me. "You might want to sit down before you read this." I stayed standing. "Just tell me." He hesitated, then began reading aloud. Cash withdrawal, $1,500. Transfer to his mother, $2,000. Jewelry purchase, $1,800. Unknown vendor, $2,700. He drew a quick line and wrote the total in the corner, $8,000. Each number landed heavy, a precise record of how long I'd been dismissed. I looked at the page. Each entry was dated just a few days apart, all from the same branch. "He didn't even bother to hide the pattern," I said. The officer nodded. "Sometimes they don't. They assume the spouse won't check." I could feel my pulse thudding in my throat. "So this is fraud?" "It qualifies, yes," he said carefully. "But proving intent can be tricky when both names are on the account. Do you want to file a report?" I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table to steady them. The paper made a faint rustle under my hand. "Yes, I want a record." He marked something on the file. "We'll keep this copy in the system. You'll get a reference letter confirming the disputed transactions." He handed me the stack of receipts. The faint whir of the printer started again, an indifferent sound that suddenly felt cruel. I gathered the copies, sliding them into a folder. "What happens next?" "You can freeze the account," he said. "That's your right. It'll stop further withdrawals, but it might start a fight at home." "It's already started," I said. He studied me for a moment. "You seem calm." "I'm tired of reacting." He nodded and printed one last form for my signature. As I signed, I realized how small the gesture looked on paper compared to what it meant, an act of resistance written in ink. When I stepped outside, the city noise felt sharper after the bank's hush. the sound of traffic mixed with the crinkle of paper in my purse. I walked to my car, holding the folder like proof of a crime no one could see, but everyone could feel. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "You at the bank again?" My grip tightened around the wheel. I didn't answer. I knew he tracked activity through our shared account alerts. I stopped at a gas station parking lot and opened the folder again. The printouts stared back like confession pages. Each line was a small betrayal hiding behind a number. $1,500, his control. $2,000, to his mother. $1,800, guilt disguised as jewelry. $2,700, to someone, somewhere, for something I wasn't meant to know. The total wasn't just money, it was the cost of silence. I called the fraud officer back. "Freeze it," I said before he could greet me. "You're sure?" "Yes. Lock the joint account immediately." He paused, maybe sensing what that decision would set in motion. "All right. It's done." The silence after the call felt strange, heavy, then lighter by degrees. I sat there, listening to the faint whir of the traffic around me, the sound reminding me of that printer, of evidence coming to life. For once, the noise didn't bother me. It felt like movement, proof that something had changed. Back home, I left the folder on the kitchen counter and waited. The clock ticked toward evening. When he came in, his tone was casual. "I tried to use the card," he said. "It was declined." "I know." His smile tightened. "Bank glitch?" "No, I froze the account." Stared at me. "You what?" "You heard me. That's my money." "It's our money," I said, "and it's gone." He took a step forward. "You don't get to decide that." "I just did." His hand twitched toward the phone, then dropped. He was calculating, weighing whether anger or charm would work better. I waited, silent, steady. He tried a small laugh. "You've made a mistake." "I've made a correction." The conversation ended there. He turned away, muttering something I didn't catch. I didn't need to. I'd already written my own ending for this part. Later, when the house quieted, I opened the folder again. The receipts were creased from where I'd gripped them too tightly. Every line, every number told a story he hadn't planned for me to read, but now I knew them by heart. The proof was mine, and so was the next step. He learned I froze the account before I got home. He slammed the door so hard the window cracked. The sound tore through the house, sharp and final. Shards trembled in the frame, one piece falling to the floor and catching the faint draft from outside. Cold air pushed against my neck. He stood there breathing hard, his face red, hands still curled. "You went to the bank behind my back," he said. "I had to," I answered quietly. "You froze the account." "I had to," I repeated. He laughed, short, angry, empty. "You're unbelievable. Do you know what you've done to my name?" I stayed where I was, one step from the hallway phone. "I know what you did to mine." He took another step closer. The floor creaked under his weight. The house suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves wanted to pull away. "You've humiliated me," he said. "I reported the truth. You ruined my reputation. I protected myself." He moved fast, too close now. His voice dropped, almost whispering. "You always had a talent for drama." I looked at the broken glass by his feet. "This isn't drama, it's evidence." He didn't like that word. He turned, grabbed the picture frame off the table, and hurled it at the wall. The glass exploded across the floor, scattering near my shoes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavy, colder than before. Then I said, "You need to leave." He glared at me, chest heaving. "You think I'm dangerous?" "You just proved it." For a long second, he said nothing. Then he reached for his coat, brushing past me with deliberate force, his shoulder slamming mine. The door slammed again, and the cold rushed in once more. I stood still, my breath uneven. The sound of my heartbeat filled the space he'd left. Then I picked up the phone and dialed. "Police," the operator said. I need to report a domestic incident, I managed. The officer arrived within 10 minutes. His car lights swept across the front of the house, bouncing against the shattered window pane. He was calm, direct, professional. You called about a disturbance? Yes. He stepped inside, surveying the damage. Was anyone hurt? No. He took out a small notepad. Tell me what happened. I told him everything. How the argument started, what he said, what he threw. The moment I felt something shift from anger to threat. The officer wrote quickly, nodding once in a while. Did he make any direct threats to harm you? Not in words, but he didn't have to. He met my eyes. You did the right thing calling us. I didn't want to, I said, but I think he's getting worse. He looked at the window. Breaking things isn't a small thing. It's intimidation. It's a warning. He asked if I had somewhere to go. I told him I'd rather stay. This is my house, I said. I'm not leaving again. He nodded. Then we'll document it. I'll file an incident log, and you can request a protective order first thing tomorrow. It's not a guarantee, but it's a start. He crouched to pick up one of the broken pieces of glass, setting it on the table. Sometimes it takes something visible before anyone listens. I felt that line stick to me. Something visible, something undeniable. He handed me a small card. This is your case number and my name. If he shows up again, you call right away. I looked down at the card. The print was small, neat, official. Proof that the system had finally taken notice. I placed it next to the cracked photo frame. Before he left, he stopped at the door. You're sure you're okay tonight? Yes. You shouldn't be alone. I've been alone a long time, I said. He gave a short nod, then pulled his gloves back on. As he reached for the knob, he paused. One more thing, he said. You might feel guilty. Most people do, but don't. This is on him. I know, I said softly. It just doesn't feel that way yet. He opened the door. Cold air swept through again, lifting a loose paper from the counter. He caught it before it fell. We'll be watching now, he said, and stepped out into the night. The words lingered long after the sound of his car faded. I closed the door gently, this time locking it twice. A thick envelope arrived marked confidential. It lay on the mat like a trap, its weight strange for paper. The seal was raised, the kind used to make ordinary threats feel official. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside were 4 pages printed on expensive stationery, his lawyer's letterhead, my name spelled perfectly, every word sharp enough to draw blood. It accused me of unauthorized withdrawals, of misappropriation of marital funds, of defamatory conduct likely to cause reputational harm. I read the lines twice, then a third time, each more absurd than the last. They'd twisted every truth I'd fought to prove. By the time I reached the signature, my hands were shaking. The texture of the page was thick, almost glossy, meant to impress and intimidate at once. I ran a thumb over the embossed logo and felt the power imbalance pressed into the paper. He wasn't just fighting me anymore. He'd hired someone to make the abuse look respectable. I took the letter to my pro bono attorney, a young woman named Claire, who worked out of a narrow office above a deli. She read in silence, one eyebrow slightly raised. After a minute, she said, "Classic scare tactic. Don't let the tone fool you." "They're accusing me of theft," I said. "They're accusing you of speaking," she replied. "That's what this is." I pointed at the section citing potential civil action. "Can they really sue me?" "Anyone can threaten it. That's the point, to make you back off." I exhaled, slow and uneven. I feel like I'm always defending against something new. "That's how control works," she said. "Every move he makes is to drain your energy. We'll answer, not react." She pulled a yellow legal pad closer and began listing facts. "You have the bank ledger showing withdrawals, $8,000 total. You have the police report from last week's incident. We'll cite both. Keep the language plain and firm." As she wrote, the faint rattle of the deli refrigerator below vibrated through the floor. It was oddly grounding, the hum of life continuing while I built my defense. I said quietly, "It feels like he still owns the narrative." "Not once we file our reply," she said. Paper beats paper. We drafted a letter that afternoon. Each sentence was surgical: dates, amounts, references to the officer's report, nothing emotional. At the end, she added one clean paragraph. "Our client denies any misconduct and will continue to pursue all lawful remedies to protect her rights." When she printed it, she slid the copy toward me. "Touch it," she said. "Know the difference." The paper was thinner than his, but it felt real. Truth written without arrogance. I nodded. "Send it." She smiled. "Already did. I emailed a scan before you sat down." Something shifted then, small but clear. The weight that had sat on my chest since the first forged loan began to ease. This wasn't over, but it wasn't one-sided anymore. "Next," she said, "we'll file a notice to preserve joint assets. It'll make it harder for him to drain accounts or sell property without your consent." "That'll make him furious," I said. "Good," she replied. "Fury's easier to prove than charm." That night, I placed the lawyer's envelope on the table beside the cracked picture frame he'd shattered days before. Two artifacts, side by side, one loud, one quiet, but both proof of who he really was. I thought about the stakes, how losing the house wasn't just financial, it was identity. Home was the last thing tying me to years of pretending everything was fine. I called Claire once more before bed. "What if he retaliates again?" "He will," she said. "But remember, each time he acts out, he documents our case for us." I laughed softly. "You make it sound like strategy." "It is. You just didn't know you were already winning." I stared at the letter again, its embossed seal catching the faint kitchen light. It didn't look powerful anymore, just desperate. The next morning, a voicemail waited on my phone. The voice was unfamiliar, but polished. "This is counsel for Mr. Avery," it said. "Your recent correspondence constitutes defamation. You will hear from us shortly." The words were crisp, rehearsed, cold. His lawyer called my courage defamation. The court notice had my name bold at the top. I unfolded the paper on the kitchen table, the edges still warm from the printer at the courthouse. Seeing my name there felt unreal, official, irreversible. The date stood out like a warning bell. April 12th, 9:00 a.m. My stomach turned. After all the whispers, the hiding, the intimidation, it was finally public. There would be witnesses, records, light. No more secrets sealed behind closed doors. At the courthouse that morning, the overhead light cut through the corridor like a glare that had no sympathy. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as I slid the forms across. "Financial hearing," she said, tapping her keyboard. "You'll want the second floor, room 203. Her fingers landed on the rubber stamp. One heavy strike echoed through the tiled hall. That sound, clean, mechanical, felt like a line drawn between what I endured and what I was about to face. I took the stamped summons and stepped outside for air. The morning had that sharp brightness only early spring brings, everything too clear to hide in. I leaned against a stone pillar, gripping the paper. The seal caught the sun like a small metallic scar. I wasn't the same woman who once apologized for questioning her husband's tone. This paper proved it. Back home, I placed the summons beside my folder of evidence, the bank ledger, the police report, and the letter his lawyer sent to scare me silent. The pile had grown thick, each sheet a small act of defiance. I called the bank officer first. "Would you be willing to appear as a witness?" I asked. He hesitated. "That depends what I'd need to say." "Only the truth," I said. He agreed to review the records and testify to the accuracy of the withdrawals. Next, I called the counselor from the clinic. She remembered me immediately. "You're moving forward," she said. "That's brave." "It doesn't feel brave," I said. "It feels like standing in a spotlight with no place to hide. "That's where truth lives," she said simply. I spent the next 2 nights preparing. I wrote everything down in my own words, not legal terms, just facts, one by one. I listed the missing $8,000, the forged loan for $12,000, the transfer to his mother's account, and the intimidation that followed when I questioned him. Seeing it all on paper made me shake, but it also gave me clarity. The stakes were clear. If he won, the court could force me to pay half the debt he created. Half of his lies turned into my liability. That wasn't justice. It was survival disguised as fairness. When I arrived at the courthouse for document submission, I noticed him before he noticed me. He was standing near the security desk, clean-cut, calm, like a man posing for sympathy. He wore the same navy jacket he'd bought years ago for business meetings. I used to iron that jacket before every family dinner. He saw me and smiled, a slow, deliberate smirk. "You really want to do this in public?" he said under his breath. "I already did," I replied, handing my envelope to the clerk. The clerk checked the contents. "You'll receive confirmation by mail within 3 business days," she said, "and the date stands April 12th. He let out a soft laugh. "You'll embarrass yourself, you know. These things always end up looking bad for the hysterical spouse." I turned toward him, steady. "Then you'd better bring proof," I said. He leaned closer. "I always do." The clerk cleared her throat, pretending not to listen. I stepped back, refusing to give him what he wanted, a scene. Instead, I tucked my copy of the stamped summons into my folder and walked toward the exit. The sunlight outside hit hard after the dim hallway. I stopped at the courthouse steps and looked down at the folder in my hands. My name, his name, the case number. They all looked small compared to what they represented. This was no longer about marriage or money. It was about being heard where silence used to rule. The courthouse windows glinted in the light behind me, reflecting 1,000 small squares of sky. For the first time, I didn't flinch from it. When I reached the lobby, he was still there, leaning casually against the wall. He didn't call out, didn't argue. He just watched, arms folded, that same faint smirk on his lips, like he'd already written the ending in his head. He smirked across the lobby, as if already absolved. When I took the oath, my hand stopped shaking. The bailiff's voice was firm, but the weight of the words steadied me. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" I did. For the first time in months, truth felt like something I could hold. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of air that makes every sound sharper. The scrape of a chair, the shuffling of papers, the faint tap of the judge's pen, it all built into a rhythm I couldn't escape. He sat across from me, his lawyer whispering something at his ear. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his expression was polite, calculated calm, the mask he'd perfected for decades. The judge motioned for me to begin. "You may proceed, ma'am." I opened the folder and found my voice. The ledger reflects joint withdrawals totaling $8,000, unapproved by me, and one additional loan of $12,000 signed without my consent. The judge leaned forward slightly. "You're asserting these funds were misused?" "Yes, Your Honor." His lawyer rose instantly. "Objection, speculation. My client's transactions were for household maintenance and medical expenses." The judge gestured for him to sit. "We'll verify through documentation. Continue." I read each figure slowly. Every number landed like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading through the rows behind me. I could feel the murmurs starting, people reacting, maybe comparing it to their own stories. Across the aisle he shifted, crossing his legs, tapping his pen on the table in that same rhythm I used to find comforting. Tap, pause, tap. Now it sounded like defiance. The judge interrupted the quiet. "Do you confirm these amounts as presented?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected, bouncing off the wood panels. It surprised me how steady it sounded, like the air itself wanted the truth heard. His lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, we request to strike these statements until authenticated." The judge frowned. The documents bear both names. They will remain on record. I looked straight ahead. Every signature but one is mine. The judge nodded. Noted. A hush fell over the room. The pen tapping stopped. Then his lawyer shifted tone. Mrs. he began, catching himself, correcting. The witness claims coercion, yet continued sharing an account. Doesn't that imply consent? I took a breath. Sharing an account isn't the same as sharing control. I wasn't allowed to question the numbers without punishment. The word hung there. Punishment. No one moved. The judge said quietly, You may elaborate. He handled all the finances under the guise of protection. When I asked questions, he'd call it paranoia. When I checked balances, he'd change the passwords. The police log and the clinic intake notes support that pattern. The clerk lifted a folder from the evidence stack. The sound of its clasp snapping open was strangely satisfying, like the start of a door finally unlocking. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering fast. He looked pale now, jaw tight, eyes flicking from the ledger to the judge. I went on. Every dollar tells a story, Your Honor. I just didn't know mine was being rewritten. The judge scribbled something. The record will show that statement. I caught sight of a few faces in the gallery. Strangers, maybe volunteers or other petitioners, nodding faintly. It wasn't sympathy I felt from them. It was recognition. Then the cross-examination began. His lawyer circled like he'd been waiting all morning for this moment. You allege forgery, he said. Do you have proof of your husband's handwriting? I have the original bank forms, I said, and my name written in ink I never used. He smiled thinly. So your case relies on subjective perception of pen pressure and color. The judge cut in. Counselor, that's enough. The witness has established foundation. But he wasn't done. She's angry, Your Honor. That's what this is. Emotion, not evidence. I turned toward the bench. Maybe it is anger, I said, but it's anger measured, documented, and signed. That got quiet applause from somewhere in the back, quickly hushed, but it broke the courtroom's chill for a moment. The judge rapped the gavel once. We will maintain order. Proceed. He tried to interrupt again, but the judge raised a hand. She's still speaking. I looked at him then, directly. You taught me that silence kept peace, but silence only kept you safe. This is the first time anyone has asked me to speak, and I won't waste it. He straightened, his control slipping. Your Honor, this is grandstanding. The judge didn't look away from me. No, this is testimony. For a moment, the courtroom belonged entirely to the sound of my own breathing. It wasn't shaky anymore. It was even, controlled. Then I heard him say it, low, furious, directed at the judge. You need to silence her. Every head turned. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. Excuse me? He repeated it louder this time. I said, you need to silence her. The pen tapping was gone. The mask was gone. And for the first time, everyone in the room saw what I had lived with. He demanded the judge silence me. The gavel hit once, then again. Each strike cut through the courtroom like thunder contained in wood. For a moment, everything went still, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, but before anyone believes it's really over. I gripped the edge of the table, half afraid I'd missed the words that followed. Then the judge began to speak, voice measured, clear. After review of all testimony, documentation, and financial records, he paused, flipping through the pages that had become my months of fear turned into paper. This court orders that Thomas Avery repay $12,000, relinquish control of all joint assets, and vacate the marital home within 30 days. There was a hum of reaction around me, soft, shocked, restrained. The air shifted. I heard a woman gasp quietly behind me, maybe someone who'd been through something similar. The judge's assistant stamped the order, the sound sharp and final. The light through the high windows fell across my folder, glinting off the embossed seal. The document trembled slightly in my hands as I took it. Proof and release in one sheet of paper. I didn't smile, not yet. Relief was still cautious, like a guest unsure if it's welcome. Across the aisle, he sat frozen. For the first time, he didn't have a line rehearsed. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgent, but he just stared ahead. His mother shifted in her seat, turning her face away as if the act of watching would stain her. The judge continued. Both parties are instructed to comply fully. Any violation will result in immediate enforcement. That phrase, immediate enforcement, felt like a door locking behind the nightmare. When the judge stood, the crowd followed. Papers rustled, shoes shuffled, whispers spread through the benches like wind through dry leaves. I stayed seated. I wanted to remember the view from this exact seat, the moment the balance finally tilted back to fairness. The clerk came to collect signatures. Her tone softened when she reached me. "Congratulations," she said under her breath. "You did the hard part." I nodded. "I don't know if it feels like winning." "It will," she replied. "Give it time." Time. The one thing he'd always stolen by making every day about his control, his story, his shame, disguised as logic. Now I finally had mine back, counted not in hours, but in autonomy. As I walked toward the exit, the sunlight poured down the corridor. It struck the framed photographs of judges past, each face fixed and solemn. My reflection flashed briefly among them, older, lined, but unbroken. A man from the gallery stopped me near the door. "You spoke for a lot of us," he said quietly. "They don't always listen, but they did today." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Down the hall, his lawyer gathered papers with quick, angry motions. "We'll appeal," I heard him mutter. But the threat felt small now, like an echo that had lost its source. He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket as if dignity could be sewn back on. His eyes flicked toward me once, then to the bailiff holding the court order. No words. Just the faint tightening of his jaw, the kind of silence that used to make me shrink. But not anymore. I walked out into the afternoon, the order folded in my hand. The courthouse steps felt longer than before, but lighter. Every sound, the traffic, the murmur of voices, the click of my shoes, seemed new, sharper. I reached the bottom and looked up at the sky. It wasn't symbolic or cinematic. It was just real, plain blue, ordinary, but it belonged to me again. For the first time in years, I breathed without permission. Behind me, I heard the doors open. He emerged, a shadow passing over the marble floor, moving fast. The crowd parted as he went by, murmurs following him down the hall. He didn't turn his head. He didn't say a word. He left the courtroom without looking back. When I opened the safe, it was nearly empty. Inside were a few papers, a folded envelope, and an old ring that had belonged to my mother. The air felt still, stale, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to discover what he'd done. I reached for the ring first. The metal was cold, biting against my skin, but it was mine. That small truth steadied me. The officer from the bank stood a few steps behind. "He made several withdrawals before the order," he said. His voice was quiet, professional, but not unkind. "How much?" I asked. "Nearly everything," he replied. "But there are still documents here, property records, insurance details. You'll want to keep those safe." I nodded, eyes fixed on the hollow space where money and trust used to be. Dust lined the bottom edge, catching the sunlight from the window like residue from a long war. I tried to imagine the moment he came here, spinning the dial, taking what he could before the verdict hit. Maybe he thought he was clever, one last trick before the end. But all I could feel was pity. He'd traded every ounce of dignity for numbers on a page. The officer signed his verification form, placed it on the table, and turned to leave. "I'll file the report confirming the withdrawals," he said. "It might not recover what's gone, but it will close the record properly." When he left, I sat on the floor beside the open door of the safe. The room was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock. It sounded different now, less like a countdown, more like time returning to me piece by piece. I ran my fingers along the metal, tracing scratches I'd never noticed before. One, shaped like a half moon, sat just under the lock. I remembered the day we installed it together, back when trust was still assumed. He'd laughed then, saying, "Now we're really protected." I almost laughed at the memory, how foolish it sounded now. The papers I pulled out were ordinary. Tax forms, receipts, a deed with both our names printed neatly in black ink. Each document was evidence of something once shared, now divided cleanly down the middle by the truth. I stacked them on the desk, one by one, then reached for the old envelope at the back. It was empty too. Only a faint dust line showed where something used to be. Still, I didn't feel broken. I felt done. Justice had come in the form of a court order and a gavel, but freedom came here, in the silence after discovery, in the acceptance of what couldn't be undone. The safe was stripped bare, but the house was mine. Every creak of the floor, every framed photo left behind. It all belonged to me now, unshadowed by control. A part of me wondered if he thought I'd crumble at the sight of the empty space. Maybe he imagined I'd fall apart, believing victory meant nothing without wealth. But he never understood what I'd been fighting for. It was never about the money. It was about the right to breathe without permission. I placed the ring on my finger, its weight light but grounding. Then I closed the safe door, hearing the click of the latch settle like a final heartbeat of the past. Later that night, I sat in the same room, lights dim, the faint hum of the refrigerator echoing through the house. My lawyer called to confirm the officer's report had been filed. "Does it change the outcome?" I asked. "No," she said, "but it confirms what you always said. He planned it. That matters." I thanked her and hung up. The clock ticked again. The silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I wrote a small note and slid it into the safe before closing it again. Everything worth keeping is still here. The metal door sealed with a dull sound, echoing through the quiet. I stood, brushing my hands against my jeans, and looked around the room one last time. The air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't bound. The loss had edges, but it was honest. I picked up the small box that used to hold his receipts and jewelry, turned it over in my hands, and placed it on the shelf above the safe. I kept the empty box as reminder. I buried the old safe key beneath the rosebush. The earth was soft from last night's rain. When I pressed my fingers into it, the scent of roses mixed with the sharp freshness of soil. The air felt warmer than it had in months. Spring had come quietly, without permission, without asking if I was ready. My neighbor leaned on the fence, watching with her arms folded, her gaze curious but kind. "Starting a new chapter?" she asked. "Something like that," I said, turning the small key over once before setting it down into the shallow pit I'd dug. It was rusted along the edges, a little bent at the teeth, but still recognizable. I used to check that lock every night, like faith in metal form. Now it was just a relic of control, heavy with the past. I covered it slowly, the dirt falling in soft clumps, dull against the brighter petals above. My neighbor knelt beside me, brushing her hands clean on her jeans. "You sure you don't want to keep it? Feels final." "That's the point," I said. "It kept everything trapped, even me." She nodded, the kind of understanding that doesn't need more words. The garden had always been his project, not mine. He chose every plant, measured every row, dictated where the soil should be turned. For years, I followed his instructions like ritual, pretending that growing something together meant we were still rooted in the same life. Now, as I stood there with dirt under my nails, I realized this patch of ground was finally mine. The roses were beginning to bloom, small, tight buds of red and white, their petals just starting to open. They looked fragile, but they weren't. They'd survived seasons of neglect, just like me. My neighbor handed me a trowel. "You should plant something new, something that doesn't remind you of him." I smiled faintly. "No, I want to see what grows over what's gone." The silence between us was peaceful this time.
Not the uneasy kind that used to fill my house. I could hear the faint hum of a lawnmower down the street, children laughing somewhere behind the hedges. Ordinary sounds, the kind I used to block out when I lived inside constant tension. She looked toward the porch. "You know, when all this started, I didn't think you'd stay. Most people just leave when it gets that bad." "I almost did," I admitted. "But leaving would have meant he won. This—" I gestured toward the earth. "This is me staying for myself." She smiled again, standing. "That's worth more than anything he took." Her words lingered long after she left. I stayed kneeling by the rose bush, pressing my palm against the soil where the key now lay. It was cool, solid, real. No more papers, no more courts, no more voices deciding what my life should be. Just this, quiet ownership of what remained. I looked at the house behind me, the chipped paint, the uneven steps. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Every repair, every wall repainted, every bill paid with my name on it was a statement. I am still here. The faint smell of roses drifted again as the wind shifted. It reminded me of summers long before the lies, before the fear. I didn't flinch from the memory anymore. I just let it pass through me, like air through an open window. I whispered softly, not to him, but to the ground. "You don't get to lock me up anymore." A bird landed on the fence, shaking a few petals loose as it hopped. The petals fell onto the soil, scattering over the spot where the key was buried. I thought about all that had happened, the forged papers, the threats, the trial, the verdict. It all felt distant now, like another person's story. Maybe that's what freedom really was, not forgetting, but outgrowing. The wind moved again, carrying the faint scent of earth through the garden. I took a deep breath and stood, brushing the dirt from my hands. The roses swayed gently, their stems bending but never breaking. I turned toward the porch, the sun dipping low enough to cast long shadows across the yard. Somewhere underneath, a small piece of metal rested where control once lived. Roots grow where secrets once were. Every morning, I write what I spend and what I keep. At the kitchen table, the sunlight stretches across the pages of my new ledger. It catches the edge of my pen, gleaming against the smooth paper like a quiet promise. The room is calm, the air still, except for the scratch of ink marking the start of another day I own. The old ledgers used to frighten me. They carried his handwriting, numbers that never added up, notes written in sharp slants, reminders of debts I didn't create but was made to bear. Now the numbers are mine, small, steady, truthful. Groceries, $42, electricity, $68, coffee with Ellen, $7. Each line feels like proof that I survived. The simplicity is almost sacred. At the community center last week, the counselor handed me this notebook. "It's not about accounting," she said. "It's about taking inventory of yourself." I didn't understand it then. Now I do. Every dollar I write down isn't about what's gone. It's about what's within reach. Sometimes I still hear echoes of his voice when I open my wallet. "You'll mismanage it. You'll ruin us." But those words don't stick anymore. They pass through me like old drafts through an open window. The sunlight moves across the table, inching toward the ledger's spine. I watch it warm the page before it fades toward the afternoon. There's something freeing about that, knowing even the light changes, and that change doesn't ask permission. At noon, I head to the community center again. The counselor waves from her desk, smiling. "How's the new routine?" she asks. "It helps," I tell her. "I didn't think something so small could feel like power." "It's never small," she says. "Writing is proof you exist on your own terms." We sit for a while, talking about practical things, savings, bills, rebuilding credit. But beneath every sentence is something larger. Ownership of life after silence. When I come home, I brew tea and sit back down at the table. I open the notebook again, not to record expenses, but to reread what I've already written. It feels different now.
My handwriting has grown steadier, more confident. The page doesn't look like a battle anymore. It looks like balance. One entry stands out from the first day. He said it was for our future. I trace over it. Then beneath it, I write in firm strokes, "It is mine." I pause, feeling the words settle into the page like roots in soil. Sometimes, small things carry the largest justice. Not courtrooms or verdicts, but mornings like this, quiet, grounded, deliberate. The counselor's voice echoes in memory. Routine isn't about repetition. It's about proof you've changed. I add one more line. Breakfast, $3. Peace, priceless. Then I close the ledger, letting my palm rest against the cover. The sun has shifted again, flooding the room in steady warmth. It feels earned, no longer borrowed light from someone else's world. I look around the kitchen, still modest, still mine. The walls don't need repainting yet. The dishes are drying by the sink, and the clock ticks at its own unhurried pace. I used to think healing would come as a grand moment, an apology, a redemption, some final closure. But it looks like this instead. Ink, paper, and sunlight. The past no longer owns my mornings. The future finally balances. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story, with respect and gratitude.